Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. For the first time ever, I am going to do a Universe Mode title history of WWE 2K20. But before we jump into the video, if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and hit that notification bell one time to stay up to date with all things 2K22 and more. Now let's get into the video. Let's start off with the NXT Women's Championship. Our first NXT Women's Champion is Deonna Purrazzo after defeating Jordynne Grace in the NXT Finals tournament at Clash of Champions. Deonna holds onto the title for 112 days before losing it to Britt Baker at NXT TakeOver in Your House. The DMD, Britt Baker, goes on to hold the NXT Women's Championship for a dominating 329 days before losing it to Sasha Banks at Evolution 2 in a winner-takes-all match. Our current NXT Women's Champion going into 2K22 is Sasha Banks, who also holds the Undisputed Women's Championship. Next, we have the NXT UK Women's Championship. At the beginning of this list is Kay Lee Ray, who earned the NXT Women's Championship at Clash of Champions pre-show after defeating Mercedes Martinez in singles action. Kay Lee Ray holds onto the championship for 398 days before eventually dropping it to Piper Niven at NXT TakeOver Toronto. Our current NXT Women's Champion going into the 2K22 series is Piper Niven. Next, let's go on to the NXT Women's Tag Team Championships. After the rebrand of NXT, Casey Catanzaro and Kaden Carter became the NXT Tag Team Champions after defeating the Nightmare Collective in the Tag Team Finals tournament at Clash of Champions, and they held onto the titles for 154 days before dropping it to the Hires at WrestleMania. After winning the Tag Team Championships at WrestleMania, Aaliyah and Vanessa Bourne held the titles for 189 days before it was vacated due to the release of Vanessa Bourne. Due to the vacancy, the titles were then defaulted to the previous champions, Casey and Kaden, where they held the championships for another 56 days before losing the titles to Kiera Hogan and Tasha Steelz at NXT TakeOver Toronto. The team of Kiera and Tasha are the current NXT Women's Tag Team Champions going into 2K22 with a current reign of 44 plus days. Next, we have one of the newer championships to the series, the $1 Million Championship. Our first $1 Million champion of the series is none other than the person who introduced it to the series, Maryse. After winning the NXT Cruiserweight Championship at WrestleMania, Maryse felt she needed a belt that fit her aesthetic better, which then birthed this championship. Maryse goes on to hold the $1 Million Championship for 245 days until dropping it to Eva Marie at NXT TakeOver Toronto. Our current champion going into the 2K22 series is Eva Marie after defeating both Maryse and Alicia Fox in a triple threat match at NXT TakeOver Toronto. Now on to the prestigious Women's Championship. This championship created to be a cross-branded title between Raw, Smackdown, and NXT. Our first crowned champion is Rhea Ripley, whose reign started at the Clash of Champions pay-per-view and lasted 64 days before dropping the title to Victoria. Victoria became prestigious Women's Champion Elimination Chamber after defeating Rhea Ripley, Xia Li, and Eve Torres in a Fatal 4-Way elimination match. Victoria goes on to hold the title for 36 days before dropping it to Raquel Gonzalez at WrestleMania. Raquel's dominating reign lasted 224 days before losing it to the Universal Women's Champion, Asuka, where it was then unified. Raquel Gonzalez was the last active prestigious Women's Championship in history. Next, we have the Pure Impact Championship. Our champion at the beginning of the 2K20 series was Maryse. Maryse holds onto the title for 85 days before losing it to Alicia Fox at Evolution 1. Alicia Fox then holds on to the Pure Impact Championship for dominating 99 days before losing it to Mandy Rose at the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view. Mandy Rose stays Pure Impact Champion for 59 days before losing it to Raw's newest superstar Aaliyah, just 5 days before the Survivor Series pay-per-view where she was slated to represent Team Raw and face off against Nikki Bella. Aaliyah's first ever main roster championship lasted only 64 days before the irresistible force Nia Jax inserted herself into the title picture and defeated Aaliyah on the Raw after Royal Rumble. Nia Jax then holds on to the Pure Impact Championship for 69 days before losing it to former tag team partner Tamina at WrestleMania. Since winning the championship from Nia Jax at WrestleMania, Tamina has been the Pure Impact Champion for 287 plus days and will continue her reign in 2K22. Next, we have the United States Women's Championship. Throughout the series, we saw a redesign of this championship. At the beginning of the 2K20 series, our United States champion was Victoria, who held the championship for 64 days before losing it to Shotzi Blackheart at Evolution 1. Shotzi Blackheart holds her first championship for 99 days before losing it in a Fatal 4-Way match at Hell in a Cell, where Zelina Vega picked up the win. Zelina Vega holds onto the title for 92 days before losing it to Brie Bella at the Clash of Champions pay-per-view. Brie Bella held on to the United States Championship for 442 days before losing it to Zelina Vega at Evolution 2 in a triple threat match against Zelina Vega and Naomi. Zelina Vega's second reign as United States Champion will continue into the 2K22 series. Now let's go on to the Intercontinental Championship. Peyton Royce starts off the 2K20 series as Intercontinental Champion and dominated the division for 99 days before losing the title to Kay Lee Ray at Extreme Rules. Kay Lee Ray's championship reign was cut short after just 10 days by Ronda Rousey on an episode of Raw. Ronda Rousey then dominates the division as champion for 145 days before losing the title to Shayna Baszler at Clash of Champions. Shayna Baszler's championship reign lasted only 99 days before losing it to Kairi Sane at WrestleMania. Kairi Sane held onto the Intercontinental Championship for 287 days before losing it to Toni Storm at Evolution 2. Toni Storm is the Intercontinental Champion that will take us into the 2K22 series. Now we have the WWE Women's Tag Team Championships. Our Women's Tag Team Champions going into the 2K20 series is Sasha Banks and Bayley, the Golden Role Models. They held onto the championships for 64 days before losing the titles at Evolution 1 to Team Kick. The team of Dakota Kai and Tegan Nox, also known as Team Kick, held on to the titles for 66 days before losing them to Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross at SummerSlam. Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross held on to the Tag Team Championships for 85 days before losing it to the Iconics in a tables, ladders, and chairs match at the TLC pay-per-view. The Iconics held on to the titles for 80 days before losing it to the team of Bianca Belair and Naomi at Clash of Champions. Bianca Belair and Naomi, also known as Team Glois, became the longest reigning tag team champions at the time of 154 days before losing them at the grandest stage of them all, WrestleMania. At WrestleMania, with the last-minute fill-in of Liv Morgan for Shotzi Blackheart, the Riot Squad fulfilled their destiny in winning the tag team championships, holding it for a record 287 plus days, and will continue their reign into the 2K22 series. Next, we have the Raw Women's Championship. Naomi entered 2K20 as the Raw Women's Champion and held on to the championship for 122 days before losing it to Lacey Evans on an episode of Raw after answering Naomi's open challenge. Lacey Evans remains Raw Women's Champion for 62 days before losing it to Sonya Deville at the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view. Sonya Deville holds on to the Raw Women's Championship for 29 days, where she loses it in a 5-pack ladder match against AJ Lee, Toni Storm, Paige, and Natalya, where Natalya eventually climbed up to the ladder and grabbed the title. Unfortunately, Natalya's Raw Women's Championship reign was cut short due to her not being able to compete after sustaining an injury during the ladder match. Due to the vacancy of the championship, a Fatal 4-Way elimination match was set between the 4 other superstars of that ladder match, where Paige picks up the victory and becomes Raw Women's Champion. Paige remains champion for 125 days before losing it to Tay Conti at the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view. After winning her first main roster title, Tay Conti holds onto the Raw Women's Championship for 26 days before losing it to Dana Brooke at WrestleMania. Dana Brooke then holds onto the Raw Women's Championship for a dominating 273 days. Our current champion, Carmella, defeated Dana Brooke in a street fight on a go-home episode of Raw before Evolution 2 and has been champion for 14 plus days. Next, we have the Smackdown Women's Championship. Bianca comes into 2K20 as a Smackdown Women's Champion and holds it for a dominating 120 days before losing it to Liv Morgan at Evolution 1. Liv Morgan holds on to the championship for 127 days, where she faced her former tag team partners and best friends Sarah Logan and Ruby Riott on different occasions. She loses the championship to Bayley at TLC. The role model Bayley stays SmackDown Women's Champion for 70 days before losing it to Dakota Kai on an episode of SmackDown. Dakota Kai's reign as SmackDown Women's Champion lasted 93 days until she loses the championship to Alexa Bliss at WrestleMania. Alexa Bliss then holds on to the championship for 240 days, but due to injury during her match against Tay Conti at Money in the Bank, Alexa Bliss had to relinquish the championship. A Fatal 4-Way was then set for Evolution 2 between Tay Conti, Shayna Baszler, AJ Lee, and Rhea Ripley to determine the new SmackDown Women's Champion. Shayna Baszler picks up the victory at Evolution 2 to become the new SmackDown Women's Champion and will continue her reign in 2K22. Our next championship is the Universal Women's Championship. Our first champion of 2K22 was Tessa Blanchard, who held onto the title for 130 days before losing it to Charlotte Flair at the Money in the Bank 21 pay-per-view. Charlotte Flair holds onto the championship for only 3 days after Miss Money in the Bank Toni Storm cashes in her briefcase on the following episode of Raw. Toni Storm holds onto the championship for 60 days before losing it in a fatal 4-way match at Extreme Rules, where Io Shirai becomes Universal Champion. Io Shirai becomes the longest reigning Universal Champion of 183 days, defending her championship against the likes of Shayna Baszler, Asuka, Kairi Sane, and Rhea Ripley before eventually losing it to Asuka at the Royal Rumble. Once Asuka became Universal Champion, she has held the championship for a record-breaking 369 plus days, making her the 4th longest reigning champion of all time. Our final championship of the series is the Undisputed Women's Championship. Our undisputed champion coming into the 2K20 series was Asuka. She held onto the championship for 120 days before losing it to Becky Lynch at Evolution 1. Unfortunately for the man, Becky Lynch, she only held the championship for 6 days before needing to vacate the championship due to not being cleared to wrestle. Our final champion of the 2K20 series is Sasha Banks. Sasha Banks became the Undisputed Women's Champion back at SummerSlam, where she defeated Bayley in one of the most viewed matches in the history of this channel. Sasha Banks has held the Undisputed Women's Championship for over 625 days. Her last title defense was at Evolution 2 against Britt Baker in a winner-takes-all match. Sasha Banks will be walking into the 2K22 series as the Undisputed and NXT Women's Champion. And there we have it. That was the title history of every champion in the 2K20 series. It's been a crazy and wild journey for this one. Thank you all so much for staying with me and supporting this channel. It truly means a lot. I can't wait to create more for you all in 2K22.